Now, a storm erupted on Twitter and Facebook last night after a job advert emerged offering a night shift position at a Tesco in Suffolk. The pay was listed as job seekers allowance plus expenses, which would be pretty cheap for permanent staff. Tesco later admitted that it had made a mistake and that the job was actually work experience offered as part of a government scheme. But should that sort of work experience actually be paid at the going rate? Liz McKean has been looking into it.
An opportunity to work for Britain's largest private sector employer. The job, based in East Anglia, is for the night shift. If the hours aren't punishing enough, consider the pay. Instead of wages, you keep your job seekers allowance. That's £53.45p a week if you're under 25, way below the minimum wage. Tesco says the advert is a mistake caused by an IT error and is being rectified. The error was to describe the job as permanent, when in fact it was part of a government work experience scheme. So the whole thing was a simple clerical error by Job Centre Plus, which operates the scheme, and it's provoked a fury. One of many online comments told Tesco it was exploiting the jobless. The reaction highlights suspicions that the scheme is allowing employers to hire a free workforce, paid for by taxpayers. Searching the Job Centre Plus site this morning, we came across dozens of similar IT errors, offers of permanent jobs without wages. A spokesman from the Department for Work and Pensions told us it was an extremely rare error and the site was being amended. The work experience placements target those who need extra help in getting a job. They run for up to 8 weeks and, unlike the work programme, are voluntary, though anyone not completing the scheme risks losing benefits.
In actual fact, all you get for doing those jobs is job seekers allowance, and then, if you're lucky, the guarantee of an interview, but certainly no guarantee of a job. That is from a company that made £3.8 billion profit last year. You know, it just simply isn't right that people are being more or less forced, because if they don't do this work, then their benefits can get taken away, more or less forced to do this kind of work for no pay. It's no surprise, really, that it's been called a form of modern slavery.
Certainly not by the Prime Minister, who heaped praise on the scheme on a trip to Asda's last month.
On these work experience places, and we're doing something like 250,000 of them, we're finding within 2 months about half of them are coming off benefit. It's a relatively inexpensive scheme.
Some big companies are distancing themselves. Waterstones told us it does not encourage work for no pay and is not involved in this scheme. When it discovered that one of its stores was in fact involved, it ordered it to stop. Sainsbury's, which operates its own initiative called You Can, says last year over 4,300 colleagues were retained following a placement. Employers say the work placements are part of the public good. But what about those taking part? The government says they are getting the kind of experience they need to help them find jobs. And with young people in particular so badly affected by rising unemployment, the coalition is under pressure to show that its range of work programmes are themselves working. The DWP is also considering how to extend the scheme to some of those on disability benefits if they're judged able to work. Advocates say there are wider benefits to the whole programme.
There is a slight problem that large firms in particular, such as Tesco, may use this as a way of getting essentially short-term labour at the taxpayer's expense. But I think actually that's greatly overstated, and to the extent that any such problem does exist, is greatly outweighed by the benefits that the job seekers actually get from this programme. It sorts out some of the problems that otherwise tend to exist in the benefit system, where you get essentially a black market with people claiming benefits while at the same time working informally in the informal economy. This makes it much more regular.
Tesco claims 300 young people have so far gone on to get permanent employment with us, and the scheme is not a replacement or substitute for our permanent staff. The great rate of expansion by the big supermarkets means they're creating tens of thousands of new jobs. But the accusation that their immense profits are in part built by taxpayer-funded workers is difficult for their political cheerleaders.
Liz McKean, well, is this scheme right? Can it help? Will Straw of the IPPR and Neil O'Brien of Policy Exchange are here with me. Neil O'Brien, the fundamental question is why should taxpayers' money, your money, my money, go to Tesco so that it can have its shelves stacked overnight?
Well, these schemes have been going on for quite a long time. The last government, the Labour government, introduced the New Deal, and that means that people who have been out of work for a long time do get encouraged to go and do work experience, because of course the problem is if you've been on benefits for a long time you get in a sort of trap where you can't get a job because you don't have experience. And of course if you just let people kind of live on benefits for a long time, it gets harder and harder for them to get into work. So politicians from all parties have encouraged them to do these kind of work experience projects.
But this is not this job, for instance, the overnight shift at a Tesco in Suffolk, and we found many other jobs like that advertised on direct.gov today. That's not really work experience in the sense of really exposing someone to a world of work. That's just a job that needs to be done. It's not a skilled job.
Well, it's an interesting question. So clearly in this case quite a few people, hundreds of people in fact, have managed to get jobs at the end of this scheme. But you're right that we do need to be careful here about what we think these kind of workfare projects are for. Is it a short period of work experience, or is it something that aims to really kind of deter people from staying on benefits? And if it's the latter, we need to avoid doing work placements that actually displace other jobs so that we don't take away the jobs of people at Tesco, for example. So in those kind of schemes, it might be better to create kind of unpaid jobs, for example, doing additional activity, cleaning graffiti, cleaning up the parks, more like workfare schemes in other countries like Australia, Canada, the US, and so on.
Will Straw, the underlying principle is that in order to get your job seekers allowance, you should be prepared, and it's right that you be required to do something in return.
That's absolutely right, and I don't think any government or indeed think tank would be opposed to the idea of getting people off welfare and back into work. The problem here is that you've got people who've been out of work for a long time. We now know there's now more than 1 million youth unemployment and long-term unemployment's going up. When people have been out of the workforce for a long time, it's much harder to get them back into the labour force. So the question is how you do that. Neil's absolutely right that the Labour government brought in some work experience, but it wasn't compulsory. The problem with this is it compels you to do this. While you're doing that, that's taking you away from looking for other work, getting the skills and training and so on. What Labour also had, the last Labour government, was the Future Jobs Fund. Now this was a scheme that gave people proper work for a minimum number of hours a week, properly paid, with time to get training as well. And the government scrapped that scheme even though it had proved to be successful. And that's a real difficulty because these new schemes are open to abuse, as we've seen in your package, and I think cause problems for those people who are trying to get back into the labour market.
Isn't there plenty of evidence, though, that it's those who are already in work who have a better chance of getting the job they want?
Well, that's right. I'm absolutely saying you've got to give people the opportunity to get into work. In fact, the Future Jobs Fund was finding that about 50% of people who are on that scheme were getting back into work. That may not sound like a lot, but compared to the people who aren't in work at all, as you say, really struggling to get into the labour market. And the other thing is that the government did this, they claimed, to save money. It cost them about £500 million a year to do it. The problem is that the study that Akivo, the work provider, and David Miliband did last week showed that the costs to the exchequer from higher unemployment benefits and from lost tax revenue went into the billions. So they've saved a little bit, but they've lost a lot.
Neil O'Brien, how would you feel that the suggestion is that this is going to be extended to disabled people, those who are judged fit to work? Well, what would that mean, do you think? Well,
you say they're disabled people. These are people who are completely fit to work. And I think that, broadly speaking, is just a continuation of what's gone on before. And if I could just pick up on, Will, you said that under last government you couldn't be forced to do these schemes. Actually, you could. And that was the right thing to do, but you definitely could. I think that the public do think that this kind of thing is fair. If you look at the polls, 80% of people agree with the idea that if you've been on benefits for more than a year, you should be asked to do some work in exchange for those benefits. So it's fair, and it's also fair in the sense that there are millions of people out there every day going out to work, working very hard, not necessarily for a lot of money. And you have some people, not most people who are on benefits, but some people who could be moving into work and aren't at the moment. So I think if we can get the benefit system to be much more tailored to identify people's real problems much more than we do at the moment.
If being the operative word there. I mean,
well,
there is clearly an image problem, though, with a scheme like this. Look at Waterston saying that it's not good for its reputation to be involved. It doesn't want to be seen as exploitative. So if it does end up getting rolled out to disabled people as well, there's going to be even less take-up for it. Who would want to be associated with it?
Well, that just goes back to the same point. What we need to do here is have a much more tailored system. At the moment, for example, The DWP estimate there's about 360,000 people who are problem drug users who are on benefits. Now, in the first interview you'll get in a job centre, we don't even ask you about that kind of thing. We're not doing enough to identify people's problems at an early stage and to segment, for example, people who have got kind of disabilities and needs in those areas from people who have other kinds of problems. And the problem at the moment is we basically wait for a year to see who gets a job and see who doesn't. And the problem with that is it's very cheap to do that, but if we leave people for a year who we could have said on day one we're going to struggle to find a job, then after a year's gone by they've rusted, they've probably got depressed, it's very hard, they've got a big hole in their CV, so we'd be better targeting help and targeting these kind of workfare programmes on those people on day one of their claim.
All right, we're out of time, but thank you both, Neil O'Brien and Will Straw.